There are many things in life that are beyond control, but the discipline of how one spends their time, how one sharpens the mind, and how one nourishes inner growth, this always remains within reach. Self-education is not something that begins and ends with a school or a teacher. It is not a certificate or a degree. It is the daily choice to rise above passivity, to question assumptions, and to look deeper than what the surface reveals. It is the art of becoming your own teacher, your own student, and your own examiner every single day. Discipline is often misunderstood. People imagine strict routines, rigid schedules, or external punishment for failure. But in reality, discipline is freedom. To discipline the mind towards self-education means to remove distractions, to cut away unnecessary noise, and to focus energy where it truly serves growth. Without this discipline, information enters the mind like water leaking into a broken vessel. Nothing stays, nothing nourishes, and nothing transforms. The daily act of self-education is about sealing that vessel, strengthening it, and then filling it with what uplifts the mind and spirit. Every day presents a new opportunity for self-learning, but many fail to see it. They look for teachers outside, forgetting that the first and most demanding teacher is life itself. Every interaction, every struggle, every success, every failure is offering a lesson if one has the discipline to observe closely. Self-education begins with awareness, an awareness that every moment can instruct if one is willing to listen without ego and without haste. The challenge is not the lack of information. We live in an age overflowing with books, courses, and knowledge at the fingertips. The challenge is the discipline to separate what is useful from what is noise, to distinguish wisdom from distraction. Just as one must be selective about food to maintain a healthy body, one must be selective about knowledge to maintain a clear mind. Consuming without reflection only leads to mental obesity, heavy with facts but weak in understanding. Self-education requires digestion, contemplation, and integration. It is not enough to read one page and move on, nor to listen to one teaching and forget it the next day. Self-education is about repetition, returning to principles again and again until they sink into the marrow of one's being. The daily discipline is not glamorous. It is sitting down even when the mind resists, reflecting even when the body is restless, and seeking growth even when comfort whispers otherwise. It is in these small daily victories that transformation slowly takes root. The Shaolin tradition teaches that the body becomes strong through repeated practice, not through occasional effort. The same principle applies to the mind. A single moment of study may inspire, but daily practice of self-education shapes character. The mind must be exercised like a muscle. Each day of neglect causes it to weaken. Each day of discipline causes it to grow sharper. The one who commits to self-education daily becomes adaptable, resilient, and prepared for the unpredictable movements of life. Self-education also demands honesty. To be one's own teacher requires courage to admit ignorance, to confront weaknesses, and to face illusions. Many resist learning because they fear uncovering their own inadequacies. But the discipline of self-education embraces humility, knowing that ignorance exposed is the beginning of wisdom gained. Without humility, there is no true self-education, only arrogance dressed as knowledge. Daily discipline in self-education also requires balance. It is not simply about filling the mind with more and more. It is about creating space, practicing silence, and allowing what has been learned to settle deeply. Just as a tree grows stronger when the roots rest in stillness, the mind grows clearer when self-education includes reflection. Without stillness, knowledge remains scattered, like seeds thrown upon stone. With stillness, knowledge finds fertile soil and grows into understanding. One must also remember that self-education is not only about intellectual learning, it is about emotional maturity, physical awareness, and spiritual depth. To study one's reactions, to examine one's emotions, to notice the patterns of the body, and to align them all in harmony, this is education of the whole being. Reading without practice leaves the body empty. Training the body without wisdom leaves the mind blind. Self-education as a daily discipline means integrating all dimensions into a single path of growth. It is easy to be motivated for a day, to study for a week, or to practice for a month. The true test comes in the monotony of daily repetition. Self-education becomes a discipline when it no longer depends on mood or motivation, but becomes as natural as breathing. Each day, no matter how small the step, something is learned, reflected upon, and embodied. Over time, these small steps accumulate into great transformation, and what once felt difficult becomes effortless. Self-education is not a race. There is no finish line to cross, no final chapter to close. It is a daily unfolding, like the rising of the sun. Each morning is a chance to begin again, to polish the mind a little more, to strengthen the discipline a little further. Some days will bring clarity, other days confusion, but both are necessary teachers. The one who remains consistent discovers that the discipline itself becomes the reward, for it shapes the person into someone who no longer depends on external validation, but finds wisdom growing within like an unshakable flame. Awareness is the seed from which all growth arises. Without awareness, we move through life as if in a dream, repeating patterns, reacting rather than creating, and allowing our lives to be guided by forces we do not even recognize. But the moment awareness begins to expand, a new horizon of possibility opens before us. Suddenly, choices that were invisible become visible, doors that seemed locked reveal themselves as unlocked, and paths we thought did not exist begin to form under our feet. Awareness is not simply a mental act of noticing, it is the living presence of consciousness unfolding in each moment. To expand awareness is to shift the lens through which we perceive reality. Many people live with a narrow scope of awareness, focused only on survival, comfort, or the small circle of their habits. Their attention is consumed by immediate concerns, by the endless noise of thoughts, or by external distractions. When awareness is confined in this way, possibilities remain hidden like treasures buried beneath the surface. But as awareness expands, as attention grows wider and deeper, the hidden treasures reveal themselves. Possibility is never absent. It is only unseen. Awareness is not something that we must acquire. It is something that must be uncovered. It already exists within us, but it is clouded by identification with thoughts, emotions, and external narratives. The mind can become a veil that covers awareness, keeping us trapped in the surface level of experience. Yet when we step back and observe, when we notice the movement of thoughts without clinging to them, when we witness emotions without being drowned by them, awareness begins to expand. It is like standing on a mountain and suddenly seeing the vast landscape that was hidden while wandering through the valley. The expansion of awareness brings with it a shift in perception of time. In ordinary awareness, the mind is either pulled into memories of the past or projections of the future. It is rarely anchored in the living present, but expanded awareness allows us to enter the fullness of now. In the present moment, the noise of the mind quiets and clarity emerges. With this clarity, we begin to see connections we did not see before. We notice the subtle patterns of our lives, the ways in which choices ripple outward, the ways in which energy moves between ourselves and the world. With expanded awareness, we no longer stumble blindly. We begin to walk consciously. Possibility expands because awareness reveals that we are not as limited as we once believed. The boundaries we thought were absolute dissolve when we look more closely. Fear, for example, often arises from ignorance of our own strength, ignorance of the true nature of situations, ignorance of the impermanence of discomfort. When awareness illuminates these things, fear loses its grip. What once seemed impossible becomes possible simply because we can now see it in a new light. Expanding awareness also transforms our relationships. When we are unaware, we see others only through the filter of our judgments, expectations, and assumptions. We interact with the image we have of them rather than with the reality of who they are. But when awareness expands, we begin to perceive more deeply. We sense the humanity in others, the shared struggles, the subtle emotions beneath their words. This deeper seeing opens the possibility of genuine connection, of compassion, of communication that goes beyond the superficial. Awareness allows us to break free from isolation and to enter into true relationship with the world. The expansion of awareness is not always comfortable. In fact, it often reveals truths we would rather not face. It uncovers the ways we have been deceiving ourselves, the attachments that have been quietly shaping our lives, the fears that have kept us confined. But within this discomfort lies possibility. For when we see clearly, we are no longer bound by ignorance. We gain the power to change, to release, to step into a greater version of ourselves. The light of awareness may expose the shadows, but it also shows us the way out of them. Awareness expands through practice. It does not expand by accident. It grows through deliberate attention, through mindfulness, through stillness, through self-inquiry. Every time we pause to observe instead of react, awareness expands. Every time we question our assumptions instead of clinging to them, awareness expands. Every time we bring our full attention to the present moment, awareness expands. Slowly, steadily, the narrow lens widens and life reveals its hidden dimensions. With each expansion of awareness, possibility multiplies. What seemed like a single path becomes many paths. What seemed like a closed door becomes a gateway. What felt like limitation becomes a lesson pointing toward growth. Awareness does not remove challenges from life. Rather, it transforms our relationship with them. A challenge is no longer seen as a dead end, but as a teacher, an opportunity for strength, for creativity, for resilience. With awareness, every situation becomes infused with potential. Awareness is the soil in which freedom grows. Without awareness, we are bound by unconscious habits, by emotional reactivity, by external conditioning. With awareness, we begin to step outside of these chains. We begin to see that we are not our thoughts, not our fears, not our circumstances. We are the one who is aware of them. And from this recognition arises the possibility of living with greater freedom, with greater authenticity, with greater alignment. As awareness expands, so too does our capacity to participate consciously in life. Instead of drifting with the current, we learn to direct the current. Instead of being shaped only by external forces, we learn to shape from within. Awareness turns existence from something that merely happens to us into something we can co-create. It transforms life from a series of accidents into a field of possibilities waiting to be chosen. Discomfort is not the enemy. It is a messenger, a teacher, and a threshold. Whenever discomfort arises, the instinct is to resist it, to turn away, to numb it, or to bury it under distractions. The mind whispers, stay safe, stay comfortable, stay the same. But life does not expand in sameness. Growth does not emerge from what is already known. Every transformation requires stepping into a space where certainty disappears, and it is in this space that discomfort makes its presence felt. To understand discomfort, one must first recognize its nature. It is the body's and the mind's signal that the familiar boundaries are being stretched. When you lift a weight heavier than you've ever lifted, your muscles tremble. That trembling is discomfort. When you sit in silence with your thoughts and resist the urge to escape into noise, your mind begins to fight. That restlessness is discomfort. When you speak the truth that you have long hidden, fearing judgment, your heart races. That fear is discomfort. And yet in each of these examples, something new is being born. The muscle grows stronger, the mind grows clearer, and the spirit grows freer. Discomfort is therefore not a wall, but a doorway. It is the entrance into a larger version of yourself. Most people mistake it for a barrier because they expect growth to feel pleasant, smooth, and affirming. But true expansion rarely feels comfortable at first. It feels like friction. It feels like uncertainty. It feels like being pulled out of a warm room into the cold air. The cold shocks you, but it awakens you. It makes you alert, alive, aware of every breath you take. In this same way, discomfort awakens the dormant parts of you, reminding you that you are more capable, more resilient, and more expansive than the small zone of comfort you have lived in. Consider the seed underground. For the seed to become a tree, it must split open. That breaking is discomfort. To push through the heavy soil above it, the sprout must strain and struggle. That struggle is discomfort. Yet without it, there would be no growth, no green shoot reaching toward the sunlight. In the same way, every individual is like that seed. To become more, one must be willing to break open the shell of old habits, old fears, old identities. This breaking does not feel gentle, but it is necessary. When you sit in discomfort rather than fleeing from it, you begin to see its wisdom. Discomfort shows you where you are still attached. It reveals where fear controls your choices. It unmasks the stories you tell yourself to stay small. If you avoid discomfort, you avoid seeing these truths. But if you face it, the very sensation that unsettles you becomes the guide that points you toward your next level of growth. It whispers, here is where you are stuck. Here is where you need to expand. Growth is not an accident. It does not come merely with time. It comes with intention, and it comes with courage. To grow, you must deliberately step into spaces where you do not feel entirely at ease. You must risk failure, you must endure uncertainty, and you must allow yourself to be vulnerable. This does not mean seeking out suffering for its own sake, but it means recognizing that without stretching into the unknown, you remain bound to repetition. Repetition feels safe, but it imprisons the spirit. Discomfort, though unsettling, unlocks the gate. In training the body, one learns quickly that comfort does not build strength. Muscles grow when they are pushed, when they are challenged, when they are brought to the edge of their limits. In training the mind, the same principle applies. Discipline grows when one resists distractions, when one practices patience, when one faces silence. In training the spirit, growth arises when one releases attachments, forgives what was once unforgivable, and steps into the vulnerability of authenticity. Each path requires entering discomfort and staying there long enough for the transformation to occur. The mind resists because it seeks safety. It has been wired for survival, not for flourishing. To survive, the mind says, stay in the known, avoid the uncertain, escape the painful. But to flourish, the spirit says, step forward, embrace the unknown, learn from the pain. This is the tension every human faces, the instinct to shrink back into comfort versus the call to walk through the doorway of discomfort. Those who grow are not those who never feel fear, but those who feel it and keep moving forward anyway. Discomfort also strips away illusions. When you are challenged, your masks fall. You see your impatience, your doubts, your vulnerabilities. This rawness is uncomfortable, but it is also real. Growth cannot happen in illusion, it requires truth. Discomfort pulls truth to the surface, whether you like it or not. And if you are willing to face that truth, you gain clarity, resilience, and freedom. It is easy to admire those who have grown, who shine with wisdom, strength, or peace. But what is often unseen is the path they walked through discomfort. The sleepless nights, the inner battles, the failures, the doubts, the pain of breaking old patterns. All of these were the thresholds they passed through. Their glow did not come from avoiding discomfort. It came from embracing it as the necessary passage toward transformation. Discomfort also has a paradox within it. When you resist it, it grows stronger. The more you fight it, the heavier it feels. But when you surrender to it, when you breathe into it and accept its presence, it begins to lose its sharpness. It becomes a teacher rather than a tormentor. You learn to coexist with it, to listen to it, and even to thank it for pointing you in the direction of growth. Through acceptance, discomfort transforms from an obstacle into an ally. Each time you pass through discomfort, your capacity expands. What once felt unbearable becomes manageable. What once felt impossible becomes natural. In this way, discomfort does not remain permanent. It is a temporary passage, a threshold that dissolves once you step through it. But beyond it lies a new horizon, a wider space of being, a deeper sense of strength and clarity. And when you reach that new space, you recognize that the only way you arrived there was by having the courage to walk through the discomfort. You once feared. Knowledge, in its purest form, is like a seed. It holds infinite potential, the possibility of becoming a tree, of bearing fruit, of offering shade, and of nurturing life. But a seed that is only kept in the palm of your hand will never grow into anything more than what it already is. It is only when the seed is planted, nourished, and cared for that it begins to transform into something alive. In the same way, knowledge without practice remains dormant. It has the appearance of value, but its true power is never revealed until it is put into action. Many people spend their lives collecting knowledge. They read countless books, listen to teachers, attend lectures, and memorize information. They become filled with ideas, with theories, with principles that sound profound and make them feel wise. But knowledge that stays only in the mind becomes heavy. It begins to clutter the inner world. It becomes something one carries but never uses. It is like carrying a toolbox without ever fixing what is broken. The value of a tool is not in owning it, but in using it. Practice is the bridge that turns knowing into being. Without practice, wisdom cannot take root in the body, cannot settle into the breath, and cannot shape the way one moves through life. A person may know the principles of patience, but if they lose their temper at the smallest inconvenience, then their knowledge has no strength. Another may know the words of peace, but if they react with anger, then peace has not entered their actions. Knowledge becomes wisdom only when it is lived. This balance between knowledge and practice is often neglected. People lean too far to one side. Some focus only on knowledge, becoming collectors of words, filled with intellectual pride, yet empty of lived experience. Others practice endlessly without clarity, without guidance, without the light of knowledge to illuminate their path. One without the other leads to imbalance. The one who knows but does not do is stagnant, while the one who does but does not know is blind. It is the harmony of the two that creates transformation. When you balance knowledge with practice, you begin to embody what you learn. The lessons no longer remain ideas written in books or spoken by teachers. They begin to shape your breath, your posture, your habits, and your way of being. Knowledge then ceases to be external. It becomes part of you. Just as food nourishes the body only when digested, knowledge nourishes the spirit only when practiced. Consider the practice of stillness. One may read about meditation, study its history, understand the science of the breath, and even memorize the teachings of masters. But the calm, the clarity, and the insight that come from meditation will never arrive unless one actually sits down, closes the eyes, and enters silence. The reading is knowledge, but the sitting is practice. Only when the two come together does the inner shift happen. The same is true in all areas of life. A student of martial arts may know every movement in theory, may understand the mechanics of the body and the flow of energy, but unless they step onto the floor, train the body, repeat the forms, and sweat through discipline, the knowledge remains shallow. It is through practice that the body learns what the mind already knows. The muscles remember, the reflexes sharpen, and the knowledge becomes alive. Balance also requires humility. To practice is to admit that one does not yet fully embody what one knows. It is to bow before the reality that theory alone is not enough. This humility prevents arrogance. It prevents the illusion of wisdom that comes when knowledge is mistaken for mastery. The one who truly knows is the one who practices, who repeats, who falls and rises again. Practice also tests knowledge. Sometimes what you think you know collapses in the face of practice. A belief may seem true in theory, but when applied, it may fail. It is only through practice that one discovers the difference between ideas that live and ideas that die. Practice refines knowledge, shapes it, and proves it. And in return, knowledge gives direction to practice, prevents wasted effort, and ensures that energy is not scattered aimlessly. The cycle between knowledge and practice is never ending. Knowledge feeds practice, practice deepens knowledge, and together they spiral upward, raising understanding to higher and higher levels. This is how growth happens, not by holding one without the other, but by allowing them to strengthen and refine each other continuously. Balance is not static. It requires constant attention. Sometimes knowledge grows faster than practice, and one must pause, apply, and live what has been learned. Other times practice deepens beyond the clarity of knowledge, and one must return to study, reflect, and expand understanding. This rhythm is natural, like the inhale and exhale of breath, like the rising and falling of the sun. To remain in balance is to move with this rhythm, neither clinging to knowing nor clinging to doing, but weaving them together as one. In life, the moments that transform us are rarely those where we simply hear or read something inspiring. Transformation comes when we take what we know and apply it to the living reality of our days. It comes when patience is practiced in the middle of conflict, when kindness is practiced in the presence of anger, when discipline is practiced in the face of resistance. Each time knowledge enters practice, it becomes embodied, and each time practice shapes us, it makes room for deeper knowledge to be received. To balance knowledge with practice is to respect both equally. Knowledge without practice is hollow, and practice without knowledge is blind. But together, they create wisdom that breathes, wisdom that acts, wisdom that transforms not only the one who lives it, but also the world around them. Understanding is not a surface-level act. It is not merely the recognition of words, nor the accumulation of information. To understand is to penetrate beyond appearance, to move past the layers of assumption and conditioning, until one touches the essence of a thing. Empowerment arises not from knowing about life, but from knowing life directly. When understanding deepens, confusion falls away, resistance softens, and a certain strength emerges that no external authority can grant or remove. Many people chase power as if it were something outside of themselves. They look for positions, possessions, recognition, or influence, believing that by collecting these things they will become powerful. But such power is unstable, dependent on circumstances that are always shifting. True empowerment does not rely on external validation. It is not about controlling others, nor about imposing one's will. Empowerment through understanding is different. It is the strength that comes when one sees reality clearly, when one no longer fights against what is, and when inner clarity replaces blind reaction. To understand the self is the first step. Without knowing one's own mind, one remains enslaved to hidden impulses, repeating patterns without awareness. How many times do people act out of anger without realizing the root of it? How often do they pursue desires that are not truly theirs, but inherited from society, family, or culture? The empowered individual begins to observe. Instead of rushing to judge, they inquire, why do I feel this way? What is the source of this reaction? This inner questioning gradually reveals the machinery of the mind. The moment one understands a pattern, it loses its grip. Empowerment begins here, not by suppressing emotions, but by understanding them fully. Understanding also extends outward, into relationships and the world itself. Many conflicts arise because people hear words but fail to perceive the meaning behind them. They see actions but remain blind to the fears, needs, or misunderstandings that fuel those actions. Without understanding, the mind interprets everything through the lens of the self, leading to constant clashes. But with understanding, compassion emerges naturally. When one perceives why another behaves a certain way, judgment dissolves and the possibility of connection grows. This is empowerment, the ability to respond wisely rather than react blindly. Empowerment through understanding also means recognizing the laws of cause and effect that govern life. Nothing happens in isolation. Every thought, word, and deed has consequences. To live without this awareness is to stumble in darkness, surprised by every obstacle. To live with it is to walk with clarity, seeing how choices ripple outward. Understanding teaches patience, for one sees that results come in their own time. Understanding teaches responsibility, for one realizes that no action is without weight. Understanding teaches humility, for one perceives the vastness of the web of conditions that sustain each moment. Often people mistake knowledge for understanding. Knowledge can be memorized, repeated, stored in books or devices, but knowledge alone does not transform. One may know the teachings of wisdom, recite the words of sages, and yet still be consumed by anger, greed, or fear. Understanding, on the other hand, is living. It is felt directly in the body, in the breath, in the heart. When one truly understands impermanence, one does not merely speak about it. One's grip on possessions and identities naturally loosens. When one understands interconnectedness, one does not merely admire the concept. One's actions reflect greater care and awareness. Empowerment flows not from the information stored in the mind, but from the transformation that occurs when understanding penetrates deeply. The practice of cultivating understanding requires patience. Silence is essential, because in silence the noise of the world subsides and the subtle movements of the inner world become visible. Reflection is essential, because without pausing to observe, one remains lost in constant doing. Openness is essential, because understanding cannot grow in a mind that believes it already knows. Empowerment is not about being louder, stronger, or more forceful than others. It is about being steady, clear, and unmoved by illusions. When understanding becomes one's foundation, fear diminishes. Fear thrives in confusion, in the unknown, in the mind that cannot see clearly. But when one understands that change is natural, that loss is inevitable, and that struggle is part of growth, then fear loses its sharpness. What once seemed unbearable becomes simply part of the path. Empowerment arises here, not in avoiding difficulty, but in facing it with clear eyes and steady breath. Through understanding, freedom is discovered. A person who understands is not easily manipulated, because they see beyond appearances. They are not controlled by anger, because they understand its root. They are not enslaved by desire, because they recognize its fleeting nature. Their strength comes not from resistance, but from clarity. Such a person does not need to prove themselves, for their empowerment is not dependent on comparison. They do not need to dominate others, for their power is inwardly anchored. Empowerment through understanding is the realization that life itself is the teacher. Every moment, every interaction, every challenge is an opportunity to see more deeply. When the mind ceases to run after endless distractions, when it stops clinging to rigid ideas, it begins to perceive the truth hidden in ordinary experiences. And with each insight, strength grows. Not the strength to control life, but the strength to live it fully, without fear, without resistance, with clarity that no one can take away. Education is not simply the structured system of schools, certificates, and exams. It is the cultivation of awareness, the sharpening of perception, and the constant expansion of understanding about yourself and the world. To treat education as something that belongs only to institutions is to miss its essence. The true weight of education lies within personal responsibility. No teacher, no university, no authority can carry the burden of your growth if you yourself remain unwilling to take it up. Knowledge may be offered, but wisdom must be claimed. Information may be given, but transformation requires effort. When one speaks about education, the immediate thought often turns to classrooms, textbooks, and degrees. But education in its deeper sense goes beyond the walls of schools. Every conversation, every observation, every challenge, and every silence holds within it the possibility of teaching. Life itself is the greatest school, and the lessons it presents cannot be outsourced. If you are inattentive, if you are passive, you will miss what is placed right in front of you. Education requires attention. It requires presence. It requires the willingness to take charge of how you learn. The danger of placing responsibility outside yourself is that you create dependence. When you expect teachers to make you wise, you hand away your own power. When you wait for systems to grant you knowledge, you remain blind to the infinite opportunities around you. The truth is that every individual carries the responsibility to educate themselves daily, regardless of their circumstances. It is not enough to blame the school for not teaching properly or to complain that society does not provide resources. Growth begins when you realize that your curiosity, your discipline, and your commitment are the engines of your learning. Education is a discipline of the mind. It requires consistency, like training the body. If you practice daily, your understanding expands. If you neglect it, your awareness becomes weak. The responsibility is not to memorize information for the sake of repeating it, but to digest knowledge until it shapes the way you live. True education changes how you see, how you think, and how you respond to life. It is not about accumulation, but transformation. And for transformation to happen, you must take full responsibility for your own effort. Think about how often people say they have no time to learn. They fill their hours with distractions, with endless consumption of entertainment, with conversations that carry no weight. Yet in every day, there is an abundance of time to learn if you take responsibility for directing your attention. A book left unread, a moment of silence wasted, a question unasked, all of these are lost opportunities for education. Responsibility means recognizing that you have the power to shape your mind. And when you neglect it, the loss is not anyone else's, it is yours. Taking responsibility for your education also means being selective. Not every voice deserves your attention. Not every piece of information is knowledge. The modern world is filled with noise, with opinions, with fragments of truth mixed with illusion. To educate yourself means to develop discernment. You must learn how to distinguish between what elevates your mind and what pollutes it, between what strengthens your discipline and what weakens it. No teacher can do this for you. You must learn to guide yourself with awareness and care. Education is also the responsibility to test what you learn. To hear an idea and immediately believe it is not education. It is blind acceptance. Real learning requires questioning, practicing, and discovering truth through experience. Responsibility means you do not simply collect words spoken by others, but you apply them, you observe the results, and you refine your understanding. Knowledge becomes wisdom only when it is lived, and living it is something no one can do for you. There are people who achieve high levels of formal education, but remain uneducated in the deeper sense because they never took responsibility for their own growth. They learned only what was given, never what was sought. And there are people with little access to formal systems who become wise because they lived with awareness, because they refused to let their environment limit their curiosity. Responsibility is the equalizer. It does not matter where you begin. It matters how much ownership you take over your journey. Your education is your responsibility because it is the foundation of freedom. A person who does not educate themselves remains confined by ignorance, controlled by impulses, and dependent on others for direction. But the one who takes charge of their learning develops inner clarity, resilience, and the ability to walk their own path. Education opens the mind, strengthens the spirit, and refines the character. These are qualities that cannot be borrowed, they cannot be gifted, and they cannot be imposed. They must be cultivated from within. To make education your responsibility is to recognize that every day is a classroom, every challenge is a lesson, and every silence is a teacher. It is to choose discipline over distraction, awareness over negligence, and growth over stagnation. It is to step into the role of your own guide, to refuse passivity, and to live as an active participant in your own development. it is the willingness to remain a student of life, not just when circumstances force you, but because you understand that without continuous learning, you limit yourself to the smallest version of who you could be.